Hello, this is Pastor Tabitha Purple. Today I want to do a new feature that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and it's one on Bible translations. Basically, I get asked a lot about Bible translations, actual Bibles, like which Bible do you use, study Bibles, journal Bibles. I'm asked to review them, talk about their paper quality, talk about the content of the translation, so on and so forth. So as a pastor, I get asked this question quite a lot. And so what I wanted to do is actually just to review the Bibles I have, because most people know I have quite a few. I mean, I obviously love books, right? Shelves are just full of all sorts of goodies. But what I wanted to do was actually have a look at each Bible that I have, one by one, give you a review, show you how I use it, or if I even like it, if I would buy it again. I must say I don't think I've parted company with any Bible I've ever bought. No, a few I've given away to people who need Bibles. Of course, I've given those away. Some people need a translation for some reason, or need me to pass on a Bible, and they don't have one, and so I give one from my collection. But there isn't ever one that I've thought I'm just going to chuck that in the paper recycling. Maybe a good opportunity to talk about the fact of how we actually treat our Holy Scriptures. I didn't plan to do this, so this is just off the top of my head a thought. Somebody would hear me say put in recycling and may feel, oh, it's really terrible because you have a different ideology in your religion about what it is, the printed Holy Scripture. And so when we talk about our Bibles in Christianity, the majority, I think, would say that we believe in inspiration, and we don't believe that the actual book physically holds the power, that it's God that holds the power. And when we use our books, we use our Bibles, that's where the power comes from. So if a Bible is faded, broken, can't be used, falling apart, I have a few of those. I'm sure they will come in the review at some point because they're still available for sale. So if we do that, then I think it's important to note that, there isn't one way to handle the disposal. I personally believe in recycling, better for our planet. So I think if it's a paper product and it really is of no use, there are two ways that I recycle. One is to actually use the pages, the individual Bible pages in my Bible journaling, so I can capture some of the biblical text in a slightly different way, and I can take those pages out. And the second way of doing it is to actually recycle it. There are Bible programs in which you can send your Bible to, and they will make it into a new Bible effectively. So you send all of your old Bibles to them that are broken and what have you. They recycle it, paper recycling methodologies. Don't know what that looks like. And then they produce Bibles with Bibles. So it's kind of saving the ecosystem, because people who love Bibles tend to have more than one. And so being the most popular book on earth, you tend to have that. So today, what I want to do is start with my Bible of the year. And so what I do as a pastor to push myself is that every single year I read a different translation. And I do that with intention of expanding, challenging normative ideas, language ideas, poetry ideas, and just to push myself to really be out of my comfort zone. One of the things that is very obvious, that when it comes to religion and religious text, we can kind of default to a comfort position. I read, let's say, Psalm 23 in the King James Version as a little child, so that gives me comfort. But understanding may come with a translation that's written in a language for today, for this time, with that intention. And you will find that people, even from other cultures, other language groups, might use a particular translation in a different language because they feel that that is more revered. But I believe that the Bible should primarily be used under the idea that it should be understood. And so if you don't understand what you're reading, then you have a real challenge in actually being able to understand the God that you serve. So it's a real difficulty. And I think that comes not necessarily at the salvation issue. So people say salvific, but I'm going to use just the general word because I think it's easier for non-scholars to understand. So at the salvation issue, which is that Jesus saves, God creates, Jesus saves, kind of end. But when we're talking about deeper theological things that may affect the very foundation of who we are, and may affect the way that we carry out our daily life, you want to have a translation that you can actually understand, that doesn't confuse you more than it inspires you, right? And so I use different translations. I'm sure at some point I'm going to run out of translations. I've even used Dutch translations as my second language, so for a year, just to embed myself in the language. And it's really important that I think that you push yourself with this. So to that end, my Bible translation, we're going to start with the current one I'm doing, and in the next video we'll do some other ones. But this current one that I'm doing is the Common English Bible, and I'm using the CEB Study Bible. So it's Common English Bible. The publisher, actually, I was looking for the publisher details. I was so confused because I'm so used to seeing Zondervan or somebody, you know, some of these big publishing houses, that I kept looking and turning this Bible upside every direction. And it turns out it's published by the Common English Bible group. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that makes it an interesting idea. It's published in 2013, which is very recent in the history of translation. Translation takes an awfully long time, and so you have to think, if it takes, you know, five years to do a translation, 10 years to do a translation, then 2013 is the last translation before they do another translation, if you see what I mean, because it takes time from one to the other. So it's a recent translation. The purpose of the study Bible element of it is to provide ordinary people with guidance and understanding that they can actually use. And so I like that element of it. The translation is from the Common English Bible Committee, and that particular committee is a cross publisher committee. So it's Presbyterian Publishers, Episcopalian Publishers, United Methodist, Disciples of Christ, and United Church of Christ. So those are the kind of publishers that came together to do this. What I find fascinating is where they took their kind of scholarship, translators, reviewers and editors from. That list is amazing. So the list, I'm going to give you a few. Firstly, it starts off with the African Methodist and the Episcopalian Church. I think that's such a nice, refreshing thing to see, that they're respected as every other denomination. But you also have some really interesting ones in here, like the Mennonites and the Moravians. I'm sorry if I don't say that right. And also the Seventh-day Adventists, Roman Catholics, United Church of Christ. I mean, it's really interesting that they've gone out of their way to be intentionally inclusive to the entire of Christianity, because of course, although denominationally we would have differences, it's one church, right? It's one Bible. We're not using different Bibles. Having said that, we slightly are. And so that's something to be aware of. There are three major denominations that use the Apocrypha. You have the Anglicans, you have the Episcopalians, and you have the Catholic Church that use the Apocrypha. But the Apocrypha is coming more and more into mainstream Christianity. There's been a lot of work done on the history of, you know, what the Apocrypha is and why it was taken out, why it's been kept in, why some denominations favour it than others. I think it's just good that we continue to dialogue about the biblical text. And sometimes I think it's really good that we remember that this text isn't alone ours, that this is a Judeo-Christian text, and that Jewish people have, that is the foundation of the biblical narrative and the majority of the Bible, to be honest, in pages. So we have to be mindful of that. So I think it's nice to see that it's a variety of people, smaller denominations, bigger denominations, denominations that go along cultural or race identities, as well as those that would be considered mainstream. I don't know that I like that word, but we'll use that. So that's something that I really enjoyed. What is clear in the actual list of people that they use, that it is predominantly American, and this is an American-based group, and it's probably, I should say USA, because American implies both North and South America, of course, so it's predominantly USA-based, although I did notice there is some South African contributors and other things, so that was a nice surprise for me. I think it was really good. And then they have this rule that if in translation you've made a distinctive enough point to translate a word a particular way, and maybe historically it hasn't been translated that way, because bearing in mind, of course, if you speak more than one language, you'll know that words have multiple translation meanings, that they have the best footnotes. Like, they really do. They're very concise, but they point you immediately in the direction that you need to go. So I really love that element about it. And also they went with the intention of the translation words. So for example, the Genesis, where we talk about the Adam that's translated, they translate that the human being, which brings out more of the meaning of the text and brings out that pre-fall, post-fall state in a much clearer way, I think. And that's really helpful, because it can be a little bit confusing if you just read it Adam and then it seems like they're talking about him when they're actually talking about her. And, you know, it can bring a little bit of confusion to some people's minds, but that's a Bible study for another time. So what has been my experience? So now comes to my experience. I actually, normally with the translations, I'm becoming a bit more reluctant to buy the translation for my translation of the year. And I'll be like everybody else, I use the Bible app. And I would just read it from the Bible app. That's generally my principle now. Because I have a lot of Bibles, and so I don't want to be wasteful. And, you know, although I absolutely clearly adore paper and books, I still want to be mindful of our environment, so on and so forth. So I don't. But I have to say, after 2 months of reading this Bible translation in the Bible app, I was so excited. And that's a lot to say, because, you know, I read Bible for a living, so to speak. I have to study it for my job. And so therefore it's something that can become work orientated, but this brought the text alive in such a real way, in such a genuinely, delightfully easy way, for not easy as in simple, but easy as in I didn't have to second guess myself reading those words. Like, I didn't have to be like, do those words mean what I think they mean? Is this in the context of 10 years, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or in some Bibles cases, 100 years ago, hundreds of years ago? I really found that it flowed. Sometimes when we're doing the translation, I think there's something that suffers. So sometimes they can get the flow right, but then in order to get the flow right, they may have had to cut the translation in a way that misses some of the nuances that you would like. And then the other thing they can do is be so heavy on getting the literal translation right that they miss that the text should be understood. And I think that the CEB, the Common English Bible, is such a great middle point. Like, it's really just a happy middle point. So I find that really helpful. So I'm going to show you a few pages out of it. I want you to see what it looks like. This one is the Study Bible edition because, you know, why not? So I have the Study Bible edition, so I wanted to share that because I think every time I buy a Bible now, I want to get some extra information out of it. I want to get some extra studying out of it. Like, I tend to buy Bibles now that have a plus, so it's not just the translation, it's also a plus point. So Study Bible is one of those plus points, or Journal Bible is another one of those plus points. So it depends. And there are Study Bibles and Devotional Bibles. I don't have as many Devotional Bibles as I have Study Bibles. I will say that the study element is a little bit more for me, but that's because it's my job. So of course, that's what it is. But I hope that you find this useful. I really was for me, it really breathed a fresh perspective into this Bible translation, and I found that really rewarding. And so I was really inspired to keep reading and inspired to go purchase it. So I still use it on the app, but that's because actually I was off work for a while. So while I'm off work, it was easier to use my phone. But now that I'm back at work, it sits on my desk. I'm opening it more because I have to do studying. And when I study, I'm a book person, not a phone person. But now I find I have, like, you know, all the devices and all the books spread out, and then, you know, your notebook in the middle. But it's a really nice Bible. I recommend, especially if you enjoy studying the text, so you're aware of the Hebrew, you're aware of the language of the Greek, you're aware of the, you know, the differences in translation, that this is a really great way to actually ignite the passion for the actual text in English again. So that's why I like it. So without further ado, we're going to look at some pages and let's see how we get on. Right, so this is the Study Bible. I really apologise if it's back to front. I'm doing this on my phone and I probably need to get a bit better at the text. So this is what it's like. It's quite a hefty Bible. It's not a small one. I don't think they can condense it down anymore, personally speaking, because there's a lot of information in here. It is a translation, not any other kind of version of the Bible that you can get, and so there's nothing wrong with those, but this one is a translation, which is really helpful. It has about 1,000 additional pages, full colour designs in there, illustrations, photographs, maps, charts. It has cross references. That's really, really helpful for my line of work, of course, but I think for if you're really getting serious. And it has some full colour maps that have been designed by National Geographic. I've just seen that. So let's start there. So the map section is always interesting. Well, actually, these are lovely. These are really lovely because I think when we talk about the history of the people in the Bible, especially in the Jewish part of the text, and in that Old Testament, sometimes we can seem so far removed, especially if you've never visited there and you've grown up your whole life in Western countries. I think it's really important to kind of notice, you know, this sort of geography. You know, you talk about Sinai here, Egypt here, and then what later becomes parts of Israel. And so you can see this connection. The land is connected, and all the, you know, the crossings of rivers, seas, oceans, waters. And I think that that's really important. You know, it's got names on there that you will be familiar with, and the fact that they've done so many to look at the geography of the time in different ways, I think is so helpful, because if you can't visualize, you know, when you read a story and you're like, which time period was it and can I actually visualize this? This is really excellent, and really helps with that. So I like this way of doing it. It's quite interesting to see the different waters and so on and so forth. So that's really good. So that's the first thing. This is the map index at the back here. And then you have a brilliant concordance. I really like this concordance. I think it's quite easy to use, and it has things in it that are actually, I think, relevant to who you are. So this, I think, is really helpful. I see that I've got a shadow there. Let me see if I can try and get rid of and minimise that shadow a little bit. I don't know if I'm helping, but we'll try. So these are really, really helpful. Like with the Philistines, they get mentioned quite a few times in the story. So having the different types of ways that they're mentioned is really helpful, so on and so forth. So that's really great. I like that element. So if we go back to the beginning, I haven't written in my Bible yet, so I'm showing you the fresh, clean copy because I'm yet to start writing in the margins. As I said, this is the pages that really made me smile quite a lot, because, you know, these editors come from different states, different places within theological centres. They're not all from one place, and I love that that kind of range of people that are contributing, because it keeps the negotiation fresh and important to people. And then this is really where it comes alive. I love the fact that they put all of these wonderful contributors in here, because you can see where, and there are more than what's here, but you can see where people are coming from. You've got a sense of maybe their theological leanings, if you really wanted to dig deep, you know, and it shows you the breadth of country that they use. They're not only out in the United States, but we have people from other places that have done this one. So, for example, this is a person from Cape Town, South Africa, so on and so forth. So I think that's really good. And when you get through the first lots of articles, lots of things, I love this bit. Now, this bit is amazing because it gives you the canons of Scripture, and it shows you very easily how we break up our Bible and who uses what. And so it's up to you, the reader, then to sort that out. So it's got the Jewish canon here, Torah, prophets, writings, which we might recognize if you've been doing studies. You've got the Protestant Bible here for the Old Testament. The Roman Catholic Old Testament, you'll notice that's longer than this one. And you'll then notice that there's an Orthodox one which seems just slightly longer as well. The Anglican Apocrypha is often taken as a separate edition, so they will have this as an additional book sometimes, and they have that explained there. So I think that's really handy to help us to understand what's happening in our scripture. And then it talks about pictures, so let me show you one of the pictures because I like a picture. The pages are a little thin, I will say that. It can be a little bit difficult to turn a page, but that's Bibles, right? So we're used to the thinness of the page of the Bible. But this is so pretty. I love the way that it's incorporated beautiful pictures and images with the article that comes. So this is an introduction to the book, and it gives you all of this wonderful information before you get to the book of Genesis. And so, of course, today I'm struggling to turn a page. So let's read a verse, and then you can get a sense of why I'm really quite in love with it, I hope. So I'm going to stick in Genesis, because y'all know if you're on here for long enough, you'll hear me talk about Genesis over and over again. So I want to start in verse 26, and it said, "Then God said, let us make humanity in our image, to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on the earth." God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said, "Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth, master it, take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and everything crawling on the ground." Then God said, "I now give you all the plants of the earth to eat that yield seeds," so on and so forth. So it's a beautiful reading of the Bible. I like that it reads so easily. You don't need a degree to understand the words on the page. And then obviously it gets the footnotes that I was talking about here, which are encouraging us to look at the references of the singular him is referring to humanity. So they just give you these extra little notes to help you. And then, of course, this is a study Bible. So right here underneath now, you'll see it's this much biblical text, this much study notes. And, of course, in Genesis, it's quite a lot. And it gives us quite a lot of information. If you don't know some things, it refers to the LXX. And so you had to know what that is when you're reading. And you need to kind of go through it. But I think that they do a wonderful job of making articles, you know, the biblical text, and then the notes and the study notes that come underneath. And the study notes are really informative and really helpful. And so, you know, overall, I would say the translation itself is what I love. I like the way they lay it out. It's a single column. And so that makes it easier. It's more natural to the eye to read a single column, because that's how we're trained in school, right? You only get a single column of text unless you're reading newspapers. But people don't do that anymore. So you need to revert the way that you read it even to a way. They still have the double columns for information, but if you're a student, you would recognize this, I think. So I think this part is okay, but I think the actual text itself, if you want to read it as a text, it's really important to have it in a way that helps you to process. So I love that about it. And I just enjoy all of these cross references. So you've got all of that in the margins with the cross references, and of course the cross references start after the first 11 chapters, because you know it's all building a story and building a narrative. And I think overall it's just one of my favourite translations. I have to cough now for some reason. But I hope that you like it. I hope that if this is a translation you've been looking at, whether you were going to read it or not, whether you had some questions, I hope this helps you to understand what it's about, why they did it, the fact that they were really trying to say, you know, the King James Version is universal and has that element of everyone knows it and uses it, and they were trying to create something for the modern language for that. And you know, sometimes we don't like to admit that language changes, but it does. I mean, even in my lifetime when I was a child, you would say, "Oh man, that's bad," but you meant it was good. And now as an adult, young people don't say that anymore. So if I say, "Oh man, that's bad," my children will question me like, "Why is it bad?" When I was like, "Oh no, it's good." I mean, it's good. So, you know, we have these colloquial language changes and uses over time, and how we use language and interact with it changes, and so it's important that we continue to push ourselves to develop that language. You know, that's what I think. Well, so I hope this one helps you. I hope that this translation review has helped you. All the best, and see you next time.